Israel launches a missile strike in Iran. Iran retaliates. And suddenly we find ourselves dragged directly into the line of fire. A missile tears through the sky, a streak of fire racing toward the earth until it slams into a school in Minab. The aftermath is beyond words. The tragedy speaks for itself. Today, billboards line the streets of Tehran, signaling a standoff that is pushing the entire world toward the brink of a global recession. But the truth is, none of this had to happen. If the British government had never approached us that day, if the Iranian leadership hadn't drifted toward the Soviet Union during the heat of the Cold War, and most critically, if the November 4th hostage crisis of 1979 had never unfolded, then perhaps Iran wouldn't be trapped in this cycle of turmoil today. How did a nation once hailed as America's strongest pillar in the Middle East transform into a place where death to America echoes through the streets? What changed? Today, we're peeling back the layers on the complete history of Iran. On the morning of February 28, a missile slammed into a government complex in Tehran. The world watched the devastation in real time. But this explosion wasn't the beginning. This story actually traces back over a century, rooted in a single piece of paper and a handshake. To truly understand this collapse, we have to travel back to 1901. Picture this. You're sitting in your own living room. You own the house. Suddenly, a stranger walks in, hands you a contract, and says, "I'm digging for gold in your backyard. I'm keeping every cent of it, and you're going to pay me for the privilege." It sounds like a scam, because it was, and it is exactly what happened to Iran. In 1901, a British businessman named William Knox D'Arcy approached Mozaffar al-Din Shah, a king drowning in European debt and desperate for a way out. D'Arcy offered a small cash payment and shares in a company that didn't even exist yet. In return, the Shah signed away his country's entire future. This was the birth of the D'Arcy Concession. For 60 years, the British Empire held the absolute, exclusive right to explore, extract, and sell every single drop of oil in Iran. Every single drop. In 1908, they struck black gold in the town of Mossadegh Soleiman. It was the discovery that powered the modern industrial world. But for the people of Iran, it marked the beginning of a national crisis. Here is the detail that rarely makes the history books. In 1931, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, the corporate ancestor of BP, reported a profit of £366,000, yet they paid over £1 million in taxes to the British government. Read that again. The taxes were significantly higher than the reported profits. That only works if the books are being cooked. Britain was siphoning wealth so aggressively that Iran was left with almost nothing. This wasn't a partnership, it was the transformation of a sovereign nation into a private fuel source. Picture a fleet of trucks lined up outside your home, taking your water every single day while your own family goes thirsty. That was Iran's reality. As Britain grew fabulously rich, Iran's infrastructure crumbled and its people remained trapped in poverty. This wasn't just corporate greed, it was systematic economic suffocation. At the time, the United States watched from the sidelines. Many Americans, shaped by their own anti-colonial past, saw something hauntingly familiar in Iran's struggle. But in the halls of Washington, Iran wasn't seen as a victim. It was a strategic asset. To the US government, if Britain controlled the oil, the West powered its war machines. On the brink of global conflict, that control mattered more than justice. But for the Iranian people, geopolitics didn't matter. Survival did. And after decades of silence, they finally found a voice. That voice belonged to Mohammad Mossadegh, an unlikely figure with the delicate look of a silent film actor, but a will made of absolute steel. On April 28, 1951, the Shah officially confirmed Mossadegh as prime minister. At that time, the D'Arcy Concession wasn't said to expire for another 10 years, but the British were already tightening their grip, aggressively pushing for a renewal of their monopoly. In the streets of Tehran, the public was almost like gunpowder, ready to explode, and they were building intense pressure on the government to bring it all to an end. In the heart of this chaos, Mossadegh stepped forward and did the unthinkable. Standing before the International Court of Justice, he leveled a single, piercing question that shook the very foundations of the Western oil empire. If Iran possesses the world's greatest oil reserves, then why are we the poorest people on Earth? When the court washed its hands of Mossadegh, Mossadegh took charge. He nationalized the oil. For one brief, shining moment, it looked like Iran might finally breathe. But Britain felt humiliated, and when Britain is humiliated, they call their big brother. To understand the 1953 American perspective, you have to remember the Cold War. To Washington, Iran was a domino that could not be allowed to fall to the Soviets. Mossadegh was popular, but his strategic ties to the Communist Two-Day Party sparked panic in the West. The CIA and British intelligence orchestrated Operation Ajax. They flooded the streets with paid agitators, bribed military commanders, and threw Mossadegh into prison. Iran's democratic experiment was over. In his place, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was reinstalled as a puppet king for a Western empire. Most stories of regime change in Iran start in 1979, but if you don't look at 1953, you don't see that the West broke Iran first. The rage of 1979 was born from this broken promise. The Shah's era was a paradox. He launched the White Revolution, a lightning-fast modernization program. To the West, he was perfect, sophisticated, and Western-educated. In 1970s, Tehran looked like Los Angeles. Women in miniskirts walked past Coca-Cola billboards. It was an American dream transplanted into the desert. But the Shah had a fatal flaw. King Faisal of Saudi Arabia once warned him, "You are not the Shah of France. You are in Iran. 90% of your people are Muslim. Never forget that." The Shah forgot. He pushed modernization with such violence that he left the culture behind. He created the SAVAK, a brutal secret police force that tortured dissidents and crushed free speech. Oil wealth flowed in the palaces, while the poor were pushed into slums. For Washington, this crushing stability was better than Soviet chaos, but for Iranians, the Shah was merely a Western puppet. In 1978, a newspaper insult to the exiled Ayatollah Khamenei ignited the streets. By January 1979, the Shah fled for a vacation he would never return from. On February 11th, the regime collapsed. Then came the statistic that changed everything. When the public voted for their new government, a staggering 98.2% chose an Islamic republic. This wasn't a fringe movement. It was a nation screaming in unison. But the coalition of liberals and students who fought alongside Khamenei soon realized they hadn't bought freedom. They had bought a theocracy. Khamenei rewrote the Constitution and created the Guardian Council, granting it three terrifying powers: the power to veto any law passed by Parliament, the power to oversee all elections, and the power to disqualify any candidate who wished to run. You could vote, but only for those the clerics approved. To oppose the system was to oppose God himself. In the end, Iran had simply traded a military dictator for a religious one. And then came the hostage crisis. In November 1979, students stormed the American embassy, holding 52 Americans captive for 444 days. To the United States, it was an unprovoked act of war. To the Iranians, they were finally striking back at the Great Satan, the power that had orchestrated the coup against Mossadegh decades earlier. It was the point of no return. Overnight, Iran transformed from a key ally into a bitter enemy. Sanctions were imposed, a rift was torn open, and it is never truly healed. But the story didn't end with Khamenei. After his death in 1989, everyone expected chaos. Instead, Ali Khamenei took the helm. Khamenei's reign is defined by three pillars. First, the nuclear program. Iran claims it's for energy. The West insists it's for a bomb. While intelligence agencies never found definitive proof of a finalized weapon, the fear alone was enough to trigger crippling sanctions. Second, the axis of resistance. Iran funds Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Hamas in Gaza. To Washington, this makes Iran a state sponsor of terrorism. To Tehran, it's a way to fight proxy wars against Israel and the US on foreign soil, so they don't have to fight them at home. The third pillar is the rhetoric. To America, Khamenei later clarified that this wasn't directed at the American people, but at the leaders who control the country. Yet, despite the slogans and the crackdowns, the Iranian people never stopped fighting for their own version of freedom. Massive protests arrived in waves: 1999, 2009, 2019, 2022, and again in 2025. Each time, they were met with brutal force. The year 2022 was the most heart-wrenching. A young woman named Mahsa Amini was arrested by the morality police for incorrectly wearing her hijab. She died in their custody. The country ignited. 348 people were killed, including 50 children. In the initial waves of the 2025-2026 protests, that number skyrocketed, with over 7,000 protesters killed. The regime calls them rioters. The world calls them martyrs. But here is the complicated truth we must face. When American leaders speak out in support of these protesters, is it genuine empathy or a calculated agenda? The U.S. has its own history of bloodshed in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen. For many Iranians, the enemy of their enemy isn't necessarily their friend. Their memories are long. They remember 1953. They remember the Shah. They fear that if America liberates them, they will simply end up as another puppet regime. That fear and tension finally reached a breaking point. Following reports from the UN watchdog that Iran had violated its nuclear obligations, the sparks became a firestorm. Israel launched strikes. Iran retaliated. And then, the United States stepped directly into the fray. President Trump authorized Operation Epic Fury, a mission with one singular goal: the total destruction of Iran's nuclear capability. February 28, 2026. The first wave of Operation Epic Fury didn't just target concrete and steel, it shattered the foundations of Iran's nuclear ambitions. High-ranking leaders were lost in the ruins of the initial strikes. But the world is witnessing a cold, hard truth. America doesn't have permanent friends. It only has permanent interests. Iran was once the greatest ally of the United States in the Middle East. Today, it is its greatest adversary. This isn't a matter of good or evil. It's the brutal calculus of being a global superpower. When the security of millions is on the line, decisions aren't made with the heart. They are made by necessity. If that means abandoning an old friend or leveling their nuclear sites, it will be done. Nations aren't governed by morality, they're driven by requirement. But if you're the one standing on the other side of that machine, the target, it feels like nothing but pure evil. The first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury followed a relentless timeline. In retaliation, Iran targeted American bases in neighboring Gulf states. To date, the U.S. has launched over 12,300 strikes, crippling the Iranian Navy and destroying more than 155 ships. But in the crossfire of this massive machinery, a devastating tragedy unfolded. In Minab, 165 souls were extinguished in an instant. They weren't soldiers, they weren't politicians, they weren't taking hostages. They were just children learning to read. No one took responsibility. Was it a misfire, a desperate defensive move, or a failure from above? We may never know the truth. After 6 weeks of intense conflict, both nations agreed to a 2-week ceasefire on the evening of April 7th. On April 11th and 12th, high-level delegations met in Islamabad for 21 hours of grueling negotiations. They walked away with nothing. The stalemate remains centered on the Strait of Hormuz and the very thing that started this war, the nuclear program. Today, the streets of Tehran are lined with billboards declaring that the Strait of Hormuz belongs to Iran forever. The message is clear: this war is far from over. On April 13th, the United States initiated a total naval blockade of the country. When will it end? Only when the defiance of the nuclear program is finally broken. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. If you found this insight valuable, please like and subscribe.